Welcome to this week's Let's Talk Paranormal. It's been almost a decade since the now famed Varginha UFO crash took place in Brazil. And my guest today, Dr. Roger Leir, was one of several investigators on the case and is here in the studio to share the story and its new revelations. Dr. Leir is well known and respected all over the world for his research into alien implants. And for the last 41 years, has been a successful physician here in the state of California and the author of the book, UFO Crash in Brazil. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Leir. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine, and it's a real pleasure being with you again.
It's wonderful to have you back. Can you believe it's almost a decade since this event?
Yes, time flies when you're having fun.
Certainly does. How did you hear about the Varginha case?
Well, I have a distinct recollection of the Varginha case when it happened, because being sort of familiar with ufology and the things that happen in the field, I heard about it right away. Plus the fact that somebody called my attention to the article in the Wall Street Journal, which I believe said "Stinky Aliens Land in Brazil." It was kind of a tongue-in-cheek article, but it was on the front page, and then on the succeeding page, it became more serious and actually told about the events.
Wow. Can you set the scene for us, Roger, of the whole event? What happened?
Well, first of all, you have to realize that Brazil is virtually inundated with UFOs. It's probably one of the few places in the world where you can actually pick up a tour book of Brazil and you can read where to go see UFOs, So in certain areas there's more activity than in others, and in the state of Minas Gerais, that is the state where Varginha is, there was UFO activity going on for several weeks before this January 20th event. So I wanted to bring that out because people were used to seeing things of an unknown nature flying around, and there was all sorts of activity that was going on. But it was on the night of January the 19th is when this event started to take place.
1996.
1996, yeah, January the 19th, 1996. Now, there was some testimony that something possibly also crashed on January the 13th, really? Which is 6 or 7 days later than this event. But at the present time, the main or the leading witness who talks about the date of January the 13th thinks that he might have been wrong, that might have actually been so. Now, let me say at the outset, too, that in describing this case, there are things that should be put in categories. There are rumors, there are facts, and there is documented testimony. And there is no physical evidence that this case ever occurred, period.
Okay.
And my investigation of the case, of course, had to do with looking for that one single elusive piece of physical evidence that I might bring back from Brazil to the United States and submit for analysis. But just being there was certainly an experience in itself. That's where my investigation started. When I arrived in Varginha, it was in a rather small plane. We had gone from Sao Paulo to Varginha. And you have to remember that even in 1996, there was some security about the world in airports. So we pulled to a stop, and I noticed out the window that there was a crowd of people coming out of the terminal, coming on to where the plane had stopped. And I thought to myself, my gosh, it's kind of a little scary. But they rolled the stairs up to the plane, and we were sitting in the back. I was there with a friend of mine, Dr. Philip Sarens, who went with me on this trip and acted as my cameraman. And so we were kind of the last to leave the aircraft. And as we were walking down the steps, steps coming down off of the plane. This crowd of people was still there, and I couldn't imagine what was going on. So I got almost to the bottom, and then someone stuck out their hand, shook my hand, and said something in Portuguese to me. And then another fellow came up and said, "Dr. Leir, welcome to Varginha. This is the mayor."
Wow.
And it was inconceivable to me that the mayor of a city would come out to the plane to greet me. So that was my first impression of Varginha. They took our bags off the plane and took us away to the hotel. But I want to say again that my purpose for being there was to find physical evidence. Mm-hmm. And I did not find anything. I didn't bring anything back. But what I got was some terrific testimony by some of the witnesses in this case. Now, this case had been well researched by the Brazilian UFO investigators, and the chief investigator in the case was a very prominent labor attorney in Varginha by the name of Ubirajara Rodriguez. And
that's a mouthful, isn't it?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it takes a day or two to learn to say that. But he was very nice, very hospitable, and he had opened up an institute for ufological research in Varginha, mm-hmm. and that became kind of our base camp, and he had a wonderful facility there for interviewing people and for looking at videos and so on. But in addition, he had filing cabinet after filing cabinet after filing cabinet mm-hmm. of documents relating to the Varginha case, eyewitness testimony, and in any lawyer, any attorney's fashion, it was very meticulously put away. So this is the kind of person who was responsible for the investigation. So I knew right away that it had to be quite thorough. Mm-hmm. Now a series of events started to take place after I arrived there, and first of all, I interviewed Ubirajara, who told about the general overview of the case. And since that was your question, and I've gone on here incessantly, we'll get back to that point. So what it involves is a crash that occurred the night of January the 19th, 1996, and then subsequent sightings of what appeared to be alien beings and very good eyewitness testimony. 2 or 3 or 4, maybe as many as 11 beings were rumored to have been seen, but for this instance, we're going to only talk about 2 because 2 have been verified.
Okay.
And so the case revolves around the testimony of eyewitnesses and what happened to these beings, the involvement of the Brazilian army, mm-hmm. the involvement of the Varginha Fire Department, which is a branch of the military service, and the involvement of an intelligence unit. It involves also medical treatment involving both one of the alien beings and one of the army personnel who became quite ill. Mm.
Now, NORAD were the organization that detected this craft coming over Minas Gerais. For people who don't understand what NORAD is, it's actually the North American Aerospace Defense Command. And they contacted the military and said, there's a craft coming over your area.
Yeah, they not only informed the Brazilian military, but they told them the time the craft was coming down and pinpointed the exact position that it was coming down.
Wow.
So when the first eyewitness saw the crash of the craft, it wasn't very long before the military were on the spot.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. How quickly did the military respond to this?
It was only within a few minutes. He was a farmer, and he was in a truck, and he had started to approach the area, and the military, the army, came from a base called Sergeant's Camp, which is not that far away. And they, of course, asked him to leave. But as Brazilians are, he didn't follow their advice. So he only left the area, drove kind of like around the corner where he could watch what was going on.
Right. Well, let's take a look at some of the descriptions of the being, Roger, or the beings that were seen in this event, and just go through the description here of what we're seeing.
Well, the beings were described as less than 5 feet tall, brown in color with kind of an oily type skin. Some saw external blood vessels that coursed up the shoulders. And they had large red eyes, kind of upturned in the corners. The skin was kind of oily, and there were 3 little protuberances on the top of the head running from the front to the back. And the torso was small, childlike. The legs were more musculature. They had 4 fingers on each hand, but each one of the fingers could articulate, so to speak, with each other. The feet had 3 fleshy toes, and one toe was described as being a vestigial toe, which hung down about 90 degrees from the long axis of the arch of the foot.
And isn't it true that they were emitting some kind of a humming sound, like a bee? Or is that a rumor?
No. It was described by a couple of witnesses, but not by others. So it's not necessarily a rumor, but it's we can only go by what a couple of eyewitnesses said, that they made a sound of like a bunch of buzzing bees.
Can you believe or imagine how this is sounding to our audience watching the show today?
Oh, I'm sure, if anybody has any sense, they have to sit out there and have some doubts. But when you hear the rest of the story, then you'll certainly be more convinced.
Now, besides the military that were witnessing this, what about the civilians? How many civilians altogether were there?
Well, to date, between the civilian and military population, there's about 86 eyewitnesses. 86,
really?
And I don't know now what percentage. I mean, I know what it was when I was there, but since more witnesses come forth all the time, it's probably changed.
And they're all credible people?
Very credible people from all walks of life. And we'll talk about some of the particular witnesses that are extremely important in this case.
And the witnesses, we have, there's 3 girls that were actually witness to this being, this creature.
That's correct. There were 3 young teenage girls who were walking home from their job as maids. And they were kind of taking a shortcut through some of the fielded areas. And there was a concrete block wall up ahead where they were coming through. And they saw what appeared to be a child kneeling by this wall. And I want you to understand, and most people don't get the idea when they first hear about it, but this is not 3 girls walking in a row holding hands. They were sort of behind each other in line.
Right.
So one girl got there before the others, and as they got closer, they noticed that there was something strange, and said, well, this is not a child, maybe this is kind of an animal or something. But then as they got closer, they knew it was no animal either. They didn't know what it was, and they got closer still, and they saw this being kneeling by the wall. They saw the color and the 3 protuberances on the top of its head, and they said, oh, it must be the devil. So
because of the red eyes.
Because of the red eyes and the bumps, horns on top of the head. So one by one they screamed and turned around and ran back home. Now I interviewed each one of these girls, and they each, I was only able to interview 2. The third one had left, but I interviewed the 2 sisters, Liliani and Valkyria.
And we can see
the mother.
The picture there of you interviewing the young girl.
Yes, very, very nice girls, live a very simple life. Varginha is essentially a farming town. It's a country town of about 120,000 people, and coffee is one of the main products, and agriculture, dairy. You find some of the most wonderful agricultural products there. So these are simple people. They have no need to go out and make up stories or to lie about something. So now these girls that were interviewed before by number 1, the late John Mack, and by a couple of other outside investigators. Bob Pratt was also there from the U.S. Stan Friedman was there, but he did not go to Varginha and really had nothing to do with the case. He heard about it while he was there.
I see.
Now, there was a British television production company who about a year later did an investigation of the case, and they had some interesting findings also. But I just give this background because these three girls and the mother, talk about telling the truth, they were approached by some representative. They thought it was possibly the government, but they didn't show any identification. They offered them all kinds of things, money, fame, whatever, to shut up and to make an announcement to the newspapers.
I'd heard that.
That said they were mistaken or it was a hoax or whatever. And, as I said, these people live in one step up from poverty, very simple life. And they turn this all down. These are very simple, honest people that did this. So, as I said, the three girls saw the creature. The first one screamed, turned around, ran. The second one, however, stood there a little bit longer, long enough to see the creature turn his head and look at her, eye to eye.
How amazing.
Then she screamed, and she ran home, and then, of course, the third one was on her heels.
Right.
So the interviews were interesting because I interviewed them not to determine if they were telling the truth, as Dr. John Mack had done. I interviewed them from a different standpoint to see if they had any involvement with the alien abduction phenomena.
Right.
Surprisingly, he didn't do that. He was there just to see if they were telling the truth.
Right.
And we found some interesting things. The girls, for example, had a dream independently, and they never even talked about it. About a month after this episode occurred, and in the dream they saw beings or creatures.
Really? Like they were being prepared for this,
Well, this was
possibly.
after.
Oh,
this was
of
after
course,
the
of
event
course.
occurred.
Right.
Then I also interviewed the mother, and from the same standpoint as to what she did, what did she know. They came rushing home. They told her about what happened. She doesn't drive, so she went next door to get a neighbor who had a car. They drove her back to the spot, and by the time she got there, the creature was gone. But I also interviewed her from the same standpoint, relation to the alien abduction phenomena. And lo and behold, she had a history of strange dreams and marks on her body. And then she started to talk about her family and her mother and her grandmother. So she had all the indications of being definitely involved in the phenomena.
Okay. And there was another witness, Mrs. Clef,
Yes.
who had also seen this creature.
Mrs. Clef, strangely enough, didn't come to the scene for 3 months. 3 months passed after this incident. Mrs. Clef was in the Varginha Zoo, and she was attending a little small party, and it was kind of an elevated area, and a very small building, and the party was going on, and she walked out onto the porch to smoke a cigarette. So she reached in her purse and she took out a cigarette and she lit it. And as she lit it, she turned around and she saw a creature at this fence looking at her. And she describes this creature in the very same manner as the other ones did, with the exception that she says it was wearing some kind of a gold headpiece.
Yeah, and didn't it look Egyptian?
Yeah, she described it as Egyptian.
Now, do you think that, why do you think this being was wearing this helmet? Do you think it was trying to communicate with its own kind in some way? Or calling for help?
I don't have a clue. You can propose anything that you want. I mean, maybe these creatures, they didn't get them all. Maybe there's still some left in Virginia that are surviving. But the UFO activity didn't cease after this incident. There was more that went on. So,
well, when these beings were captured, Dr. Leir, where were they taken?
Well, there was a capture that occurred on a little hillside by both the fire department, which is a military unit, and the Army. They were taken to this sergeant's camp. And in sergeant's camp, there was kind of the catch-all place for material and everything that came there. All the material, as we know now, eventually went to a place called Três Corações, and from Três Corações, everything was taken to São Paulo, and it was all loaded, again, according to eyewitnesses, onto a U.S. military cargo plane, and was gone. But there are a lot of things that happened in between there. And the fire department, who was involved in the capture of at least 2 of these beings, supposedly captured it with a net. But I found out that to be an unsubstantiated story, because when we went to the fire department, we were taken in like friends, like buddies, and civilians are not allowed to be there because it's a military installation.
Well, isn't that something?
So it was extraordinary. So when I asked them about the net and so on, they said, no, we don't have a net. We have something like this. And they showed us this pole with this looped rope around it, and this is what we use to capture various beings. So now the personnel of the fire department when we were there was not the original personnel that were there in 1996. But interestingly enough, they were still in contact with the original personnel. Now it is possible, for example, that maybe the Army had a net. So just because the fire department says they don't use nets, they use these devices, that the Army may have had a net, see? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the story is fictitious. Now, when I was at the fire department, we were able to look at the original fire engine, very well kept fire engine that was actually used in the capture of 2 of these beings. Now, the other being that I'm going to talk about may have been one of the 2 that I just talked about. Okay. That we know for sure. Where the girls saw this being kneeling by the wall, it was only a short distance from there, down the street, that later that day, 2 military police officers driving a car saw one of these beings trying to cross the street. Really? And so one of them got out, a 23-year-old, very healthy, robust military intelligence officer, and his name was Marco Eli Tracie. And he got out of the car. The other police officer stayed in the car, and what he did was he went over and he put his arm around this being, and he guided him without resistance into the car and put him on his lap. My goodness. And the first place they took the being was to akin, what we have here, to a first aid station. And there is just a very primitive little medical facility where they were told there was not much that they could do for him. So they was taken to the next place, which was Hospital Regional, which is a regional hospital in Varginha, a nice, good hospital. Dr. Leir, why do you think this did not make CNN headline news? I mean, this is an amazing event here for the whole world to know about. Well, probably for the same reason that the events now going on in Brazil, which is on May the 20th, just a short few days ago, the Brazilian Air Force released Air Force government documents to 6 Brazilian researchers on UFOs. And one of them, these were the 3 biggest events that have ever occurred in Brazil. These objects were chased by military Air Force jets, photos taken of them, all kinds of research, radar returns, and I understand one file alone has over 100 photos. Good Lord. I would assume that being big news would be in every single newspaper, but I haven't read a thing. Really? Why do you think these beings were here? What do you think was their purpose of the journey? Well, everybody looks at some kind of an organized thing about beings coming here from somewhere else, and they have this job to do and that job to do, or they're part of the Star Trekian Federation of Planets. how do we know that, on some small planet, not that far away, in our neighborhood, as Stan Friedman has to say.
Just down the street.
Just down a few light years away.
A few light years away.
That on planet Gluck, Harvey says to his wife, look, I got the weekend free. I got a wonderful idea. We'll go down to Joe's Rent-A-Saucer lot, and I'll get a saucer. You pack some lunch. We'll throw the kids in. I heard about this wonderful place. Out on this little arm of the Milky Way galaxy, there's this little beautiful blue and white planet. We'll go down there. I understand these creatures that live there, they're a riot. They kill themselves daily. They blow up things in the atmosphere. They burn the planet. They destroy. I mean, we'll cloak. Nobody will see us. We'll be safe. We'll have a ball for the weekend. So how do we know these guys weren't there just in the wrong place at the wrong time? But also what I didn't mention was that the eyewitness said that when he saw the craft come down, which was a cylindrical shaped object, that it was smoking or there was vapor or something coming out of what he considered the back end of it, and that there was a piece missing.
Oh.
So that
was it
raises
shot at?
the question.
Okay.
Was it shot at?
Dr. Leir, hold that thought. We've sadly come to the close of the show, but Dr. Leir is coming back on the show next week for part 2 of this incredible story of the Varginha crash. So please join us next week. I will give you information of Dr. Roger Leir's website right now. It's coming up on the screen, www.alienscalpel.com, and of course our website, letstalkparanormal.com. You can read more information about Dr. Leir there, and of course his book, UFO Crash in Brazil. Join us next week for an exciting part 2. Bye-bye.